it's harder to come out of jail than to go into jail. It's amazing, but it's harder. And the reason is, I think, is because you're thrown into jail and then everything's done for you, meaning that your hours, your clothes, and there's nothing to do, and you just sit there, on my first night, and you sit there and go, oh my God, how did this happen?
This is Random DC, and my guest today is Rodney Adler. Welcome to the Random DC show, Rodney.
Thank you.
It's lovely to have you. Actually, I was really looking forward to having you today because you had an extraordinary journey so far, and I'm sure there's more to come. But, you have a very privileged upbringing, had a fantastic school and university life, great career, then everything collided and went somewhere else. You went to jail, and then you came out and you rebuilt your career, and in between there were so many other things happening, so I want to know more of the details.
Well, that's it. That's the story.
Well, that's a big picture story, so let's go to the details. So tell me a little bit about your childhood, about your parents. Your father was a very well-known entrepreneur and successful entrepreneur.
Great childhood, privileged childhood, Cranbrook School all the way through, from kindergarten all the way to the end. Lived in a nice suburb. Parents were together all the way through. Unfortunately, my father died at 57. My mother died at 79. So yeah, it was a really good upbringing in that regard.
So were you close to your father as you were growing up?
Very close to my father, because my father lost his father in the war, the Second World War. He sort of gave me the love that he would have given his father, and I was his firstborn and his only son. So I always felt that I had two loves. I had super love from Dad.
Yeah, golden child.
Well, Dad was very supportive of me. When people feel supported, they excel. And when people are not allowed to feel that they are going to succeed, you don't do as well. Like, as a venture capitalist, part of my job is to actually push my partners and promote them and compliment them, because sometimes my job is just taking the shackles of oppression off them and allowing them to run. Dad was my greatest supporter. Like, I wasn't great at school, and I don't like following the rules and regulations, and so the teachers weren't overly impressed with me. But Dad always thought that I would come good, and some people would probably say I didn't, but I'd like to think there's
more
some
to the
truth.
story.
There's
much more to the story.
Yeah.
And, so your father was a very successful entrepreneur. I mean, he came here as a refugee. Is that right?
Could not speak English very well. Came here, escaped from Hungary between the end of the war and the Russian occupation. The Menzies government at the time allowed people like Dad to come if they worked for 2 years afterwards. So Dad paid for his passage to Australia, working on the Adelaide railroads for 2 years. And then he eventually made his way down to Sydney. There's many great stories about Dad. Dad, when he gave a speech, when he read his speech, his Hungarian accent was very pronounced and hard to understand.
A bit like mine.
No, you're easier. But when he spoke off the cuff and answered questions, he was perfect. And Dad had actually constitutional QCs coming to see him to interpret the Constitution and certain words. And I asked him, like, why are you so good at English? And he said to me, when I was young, as in 19, 20, 21, here in Australia, I really wanted to learn the language. I didn't have any money. So what I did is I went to church and I listened to the priests and the fathers talk, because their elocution was so good. So I sat there listening to them.
Right.
And he said, for many years I would write letters and I would send it to a QC that I had on retainer, just to correct my correspondence.
Wow.
And he studied words. So he became very good at English.
Fantastic.
Yeah, he had a great common sense.
And then he became very successful in business, of course. How did he start?
Oh, he had many jobs. He worked a taxi at night. He had a radio shop. He had a lot of jobs in an electrical shop, and some didn't do well. But then eventually, after all of that, he started a car yard. He he bought and sold the cars. And he was doing rather well because Dad was a pretty good salesman. In fact, if you find most great managing directors are great salesmen.
You have to be.
Yeah, you do, especially these days, but even in those days. So Dad was doing quite well, buying cars, selling cars, making a turn. And then he looked down the old expense column and said, what's my biggest expense? And for him at that time, it was finance. So he thought, I should start a finance company, which is a bold thing to do when you have no money.
Of course.
But in those days, in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s, starting a finance company was just registering the name and putting your name on the door, and you were a finance company. No reserves, no rule legislation. So what happened is he bought the cars, sold the cars, and financed the cars. And financing cars, it just means that if the cost of the car was £2,000, he would sell it for £1,000, give them terms. That was financing for Dad in those days. But that means his sales went up. He could sell a lot more cars. And that went well. So then he looked down the old expense column and he said, Jesus, I'm paying a lot to insurance. I really don't like this. And this is my summary of it. I'm sure it was far more reasonable and thought out. So he started an insurance company. Same way, no reserves, just started an insurance company. So he bought the cars, sold the cars, financed the cars, and insured the cars. And he was doing very well.
But I mean, this is amazing because what he did is he solved his own problems, which is what we're trying to teach to all the startup founders today. Don't develop a product, find a problem and solve it.
Yeah. Well, he sort of developed his own ecosystem, really. Yeah. And then he made the big decision that is really hard to understand as a university-educated person. And as Dad said, despite your university, Rod, you may be okay, because Dad felt that when you were so very well educated, you were taught not to understand risk. Mm. So Dad wasn't against education; he was very pro-education, but he didn't want you to lose the risk calculation. Anyway, so there came a time that he just sold the car business and he kept the insurance and he kept the finance. And I asked him when I was early teenager, like, why did you do that? Because it appears to me that the car business was the real cash flow, and the others were just incremental profits. But the real money was in the cars at that time. And he said, you're right. He said, then it came down to personal preference. What did I want for myself in life? Did I want to be a second-hand car dealer? Or did I want to be a finance insurance guy dealing with really smart people? What did I want personally? Mm. And I didn't want to be a second-hand car dealer. I wanted to be more. Mm. So I sold the cash flow and I invested everything back into finance and insurance. And that's where he started. And that decision is a very brave decision. Mm.
And of course, he built HIH Insurance, which became ultimately the third largest insurance company in Australia.
Yeah.
And
then after the takeover by HIH, we were the largest with HIH, which was obviously the biggest mistake. But yeah, at that time, whoever bought us, and there was a premium frenzy when I sold, so whoever bought us became the largest.
Amazing. But I want to go back to a little bit to your childhood and maybe Cranbrook and see how those networks and social connections that you built in your childhood, were you able to make friends there?
Oh yeah, I was born. I'm an Aussie.
Oh, I know that, but you know, some people can't make friends.
No, I'm not.
Were you the type of kind of Cranbrook student who was networking and making friends and doing sports and doing all those things?
Was I socially inept? No. Was I a great sportsman? No. I was captain of tennis.
Right.
But I'm not a team player. I'm an individual player. Look, Cranbrook was a great school. Great education. When I say great, a very good general education. You know, grammar, for instance, pushes the intellect, and Joey's pushes the sport. But Cranbrook's an all-round school. It was a good school. And I may not be too excited by their co-ed initiatives now, but in those days, it was a great school. And I wasn't a great student, but I had a good education, and I made some great friends. I mean, for instance, Jody Rich. I met at Cranbrook, and we started Imagineering together, and then OneTel together.
Yeah.
You know, Jamie Packer. Yeah. I met him there too, and Cranbrook is a good school. I don't think I was really networking per se.
Yeah.
But I did ask Dad once again when I was about 16 or 17. I said to him, why did you send me to Cranbrook? And because it was expensive, and we were doing well, but it's an expensive school. And Dad said, there's two reasons you send a person. Like I sent my daughters to Kambala, I said, Dad, and I sent you to Cranbrook, and there's two reasons. One is to meet the right people. See, when I came to this country, I knew no one. I had to build my own networks. But you're either first generation or second generation, whichever way you look at it. You'll meet them at school. And if you can pick the phone up and get to the right person because you've met them at school, that is one of the great benefits of private education in this country. And of course, the other benefit is the education itself. But both are very important. And that's why a lot of immigrant families bust a gut to send their kids to private schools. It's not just for the education. It's for meeting the right people. And I hope that doesn't sound snobby. It's just reality.
Well, it certainly is. My daughter went to Skeggs, Darlinghurst for 13 years for the same reason, because, immigrant family, although my husband was Australian, but, we still didn't have any roots in Sydney. So it was really important that she creates those roots by establishing those long-term relationships. And you can do that in a private school if you go there all the way through, because of course, almost always the same people go there. Like, it's very rare when private school kids leave private school, maybe 20% of them would leave. So there's quite a consistent population there. So you can build friendships.
I mean, the friends that you make at school are the friends you take through your whole life, mostly. Sure, you can pick up a few in university, but after you leave university, you don't have time. Really, you don't have time to develop friendships. So school and uni are it.
Absolutely.
They're the best. They're the long-serving ones.
I do find the same. I mean, I'm still friends with all the people that I went to university here, and they were friends of mine then, and we still connect now. 30 plus years later. So it's definitely true for, I think, most people. Tell me a little bit about when you started working for your father. Was that your first job, or you first worked somewhere else?
Dad and I were very close. I just wanted to leave school and work with Dad. Dad said no. He said, in this modern world, 45, 50 years ago, you need a degree. I said, I don't want a degree. I just want to work with you. You can teach me everything I need to know. And he goes, I don't want you in the company until you've got a degree. So we had that sort of debate. So I did commerce at University of New South Wales. I graduated commerce. And then by that time I'd sort of matured just a little bit more than I was when I left school. And I said to Dad, look, I am your son, and I am going into a company that you dominate. So I think I need to get another degree before I join you, because just for my own self-respect, I'd like to be the most degreed person in the organisation. So I did a part-time master's degree, and I did my chartered accounting. And then I went overseas and worked in insurance in London, Lloyd's of London, reinsurance broker Stuart Wrightson, and a stockbroker. And after that year, I came back and I felt that I was qualified then to work for Dad, because then I had 3 degrees. I had overseas experience, and I walked into the company, as I wanted to, the most degreed person.
Yeah, and also on your merit, because you worked somewhere else, you've shown your colours already. So
it's nice to make your mistakes in another organisation, cost another organisation money, and then come into, something that's important and try not to make mistakes, even though we all make mistakes.
How old were you when you joined FAI?
Joined FAI, I would have been 24.
24. Were you married already?
No, I got married at 28, 29.
28, 29. So then, those were pretty crucial years, those 28, 29 for you, because you also, that was the time when your father passed away?
Yeah, Dad died in 1988 at the age of 57, and I was about 29 then. I had literally just got married. So no, I got married virtually 9-10 months ago, and my wife was carrying our first child, and that would have been my father's first grandchild. So he missed that because of a heart attack. So I became the managing director having been the investment manager, I became the managing director at 29.
At 29,
Yeah.
of a company that is a very significant insurance company.
Of a company at that stage had 900,000 policyholders,
Wow.
had $3 billion worth of debt. $1 billion of that debt was Swiss francs, unhedged. We had $1 billion worth of entrepreneurial debt to all the entrepreneurs of the day. And we had about a 1 billion turnover and about 500 staff around Australia.
So how did the HIH acquisition come about? How did that happen?
So 11 years later, we had a lot of issues. We really struggled that first 5 years of my stewardship of the company. There were a lot of issues. It was touch and go for a while, but we got through. Then we started doing well. Our growth was good. I was growing around 12% per annum. By the time that HIH took us over, I had 1.8 million customers.
Wow.
A lot of the debt had been paid down. We had 4,000 staff around Australia and Asia. We had a coal mine, we had property, and we secured a lot of debt into equity, into ownership. So the company was a conglomerate by this stage. It wasn't a pure insurance company. And I had expanded the financial services considerably. However, we got to the stage, when HIH were interested in FAI, that I couldn't fund the growth any longer. Being a major shareholder, around 30%, our share price was not good. If I were to raise equity, I would be diluting myself, and then I would be bought out because we're too valuable.
You were vulnerable.
And there was a premium frenzy at the time. People were looking to buy income, and I knew that we were a hot commodity. The company was in great shape. We had the best management of any insurance company in Australia. I'm obviously biased, but we had the best management. We were doing well, and anyone who bought us in the top 10 became number one.
Right.
And my real hope and desire was for QBE to buy us.
Right.
I was close to QBE. Their management was good. We were close. And John Cloney was the chairman at the time. Frank O'Halloran was the managing director. And I basically put the company up for sale. I came to the conclusion that it would be best for me to be part of a bigger group. And as much as it broke my heart, because I would have loved to have stayed there forever, I thought it was the right thing to do for all shareholders and the policy holders. And look, HIH made the highest offer. They weren't my preferred company, as I said. QBE bid, but they were a little bit lower, and it's a public company. And I went to Frank and I said, please, I will recommend you. All you have to do is match HIH. Just match them, and you get it. And he said, no, that's my price. And I said, well, I can't do anything about that. Yeah. And I just want you to know that decision that they didn't buy and HIH did buy, that changed my world. Because, see, HIH was a disaster that we did not know.
Right.
If they hadn't purchased us and QB had purchased us, it would have been a different world for me, and it would have been I would have never gone to jail. I would have, my net wealth would have never fallen the way it did. My reputation would have never been tarnished. I'm not saying I'm a saint. I'm saying it, it's that movie Sliding Doors.
Yes.
If QB had bought us and they were like 1.5 cents away instead of HIH, my world would have been completely different and better.
Yeah. And, I was going to ask you about that one decision that if you could go back, you changed. It sounds like that particular decision may be the one, although, you were a public company, so they were, it's not like you could make a decision like that.
If I could go back with the knowledge I have today and be younger Rod, I wouldn't have put the company up for sale. I would have just gone straight to QBE.
Right.
And I would have said, you just tell me the price that you want to pay, what you think is fair and reasonable. I would have done the deal.
At the end, HIH paid something like $330 million. Was it all cash or cash and equity?
Half cash, half shares.
Half cash, half equity.
I accepted all shares for mine.
Right.
Because I wanted to. I had great aspirations. I wanted to be chairman of the combined entity. I didn't want to move out of the industry. Insurance is one of the best businesses in the world. When we had a 1.5 billion turnover, we were sort of like large, but in a Australian sense, but small in the global sense.
Of course.
And by combining with any other top 10 insurance company, we would be 3 or 4 billion in an Australian sense, and that gave us real clout at that time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you merged with HIH. You ended up on the board, but there were cracks started to appear, and obviously once you were in and you were on the board, you started to see those cracks.
Yep.
A lot more.
I was a non-executive director, the largest individual shareholder. My significant percentage of my personal wealth was in the company. I was a committed person, and it was a dysfunctional board with a dysfunctional managing director, and of course one can say that now in hindsight very easily, but it takes a while to figure it out. Ray Williams is a nice guy. Ray Williams has a very big heart. Probably that's part of the problem. He said he was a yes guy. He surrounded himself with yes people. He didn't really get to know the truth. And I knew the truth because I was a previous managing director, and HIH was my competitor.
Right.
So we competed, and we didn't like them so much. They were one of our big competitors. So I knew their faults, but despite that, they bid the highest price. So the first thing that really upset me with Ray Williams is we had a handshake agreement. See, I felt that my team was the smarter team. So I felt that the combination of HIH and FAI would be a good combination, or I wouldn't have accepted it. But
of course,
but I said to Ray Williams, look, my guys are better than your guys, and you probably think your guys are better than mine. I get that, but I know mine are better. So the only thing I ask you is that when we combine, you don't just appoint your people, right, which is the norm, because it wasn't really a merger. They took us over. You don't appoint your people. You open every major position up, and there's a committee that makes a decision on who is the best person. I was happy for that because I know that my guys would have done better. He broke his word. He didn't open it up. He basically fired most of my people. And most of my people are in senior positions today, by the way. The FAI people are absolutely unbelievable. They are all in senior positions today, unless they're retired.
Of course. So is that where all the trouble started, where things started to unravel? Is that where it started?
Well, I started to realise that HIH had a few problems. I mean, FAI wasn't a pure company either. We had our problems too, and I knew what they were. But HIH was much bigger. And the difference between my management and the HIH management is that I knew what our problems were, and I was dealing with them, and they didn't know what their problems were, and they weren't dealing with them. And I went to Ray Williams, and I said to her, you're in trouble, but you don't know it, but I know it. And I think we can trade out of this difficulty, but we have to make some very, very hard, quick decisions. I inherited a company with problems, and it took me 7 or 8 years to solve them. I could have done it again with HIH if I had the support. And I could have worked with Ray Williams. I mean, he was the managing director. I was a non-executive director. I could have worked with him and helped him. But you need to make tough decisions. And I didn't get a receptive hearing. He didn't believe me. Or maybe he did believe me and he didn't want to do anything about it. There are some managing directors of large public companies that just believe by making takeovers you can keep growing and hide the problems. That works for a while, sort of the Alan Bond theory of existence. But eventually you have to get the company right. And I got so nervous about it that I actually went to ASIC. Yeah, you know, which is a big thing for me to say because they're not my favourite body in the world. And I went there and I called a meeting, and it was the deputy commissioner, not the top person, not the top guy. He was, and I sat there, and there was me and like 5 of them, and I said, look, I'm a director of HIH, and I'm coming to tell you I've got some real concerns. I've got some serious issues, and I would like to actually tell you what my concerns are. But as a director of the company, I need an indemnity because there is such a thing as board.
Of course, responsibility.
Responsibility, corporate governance.
You've got collective responsibility.
Yeah,
for it.
And I was told they wouldn't give me an indemnity, and I said, look, if you don't give me an indemnity, I'm not going to talk to you. And
so that never happened.
So I shut my book and walked out. And you know, maybe if they had given me an indemnity, it wouldn't have collapsed. You know, so HIH is still in runoff today. It's still got hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of assets today. You know, nearly 30 years later.
Wow.
You know, they said that HIH was the biggest collapse in history in Australia at the time, $5.4 billion or something. It wasn't. That was an actuarial calculation. It was wrong.
Right.
I said then it was wrong. I say now it was wrong. But now I know I'm right because the figures back me up.
Right.
But HIH should not have collapsed. It didn't need to collapse. What it needed was tough management, and it needed a board and a senior management team that the market trusted. The reason that FAI survived when I took it over from my father is because I did everything that was necessary to survive, and I had the respect of the insurance commissioner, and I had the respect of our banks. And HIH lost that.
I mean, the share price was sliding very rapidly of HIH at the time. Clearly, the market was aware that something was going on. Yeah. And it's very difficult to manage that with a dysfunctional board. Yeah. And with poor management. I mean, you know, you almost got the trifecta for failure in place. So what happened after, and how did you end up in the situation where ultimately you were charged and convicted of a charge of dishonesty? Is that what the charge was?
There were 4 charges that I eventually agreed to, but just a step before that, the federal government at the time under John Howard decided to, when HIH collapsed, decided to have a royal commission into the collapse of HIH. Royal commissions aren't usually suggested for commercial collapses. They're normally industry-wide things. Of course. Or, you know, this was the first time that there was a royal commission to a corporate collapse, and you know, it sort of became a royal commission into me. That's sort of what happened. Right. And
why was that? I mean, you were a non-exec director. There was a managing director. There was a chairman. Why did it become all about you?
I had a high profile. I was very opinionated, very young, even then. And
I mean, you would have been in your mid-30s,
yeah.
late 30s?
No, by that time I was early 40s.
Early 40s.
And look, I was involved in a lot of things. At the end of every boom, there's a crash, and in those crashes, there are always 3 or 4 people that go to jail because that's how it writes itself. It's like the recession that we haven't had yet. You need that recession to get the equilibrium back. Likewise, at that time, there were several people that the government felt should go to jail, and I was one of those people.
You were the only one who ultimately did go to jail? Or
no, Ray Williams went to jail. The finance director went to jail. Brad Cooper went to jail, even though he wasn't directly involved in the insurance. I went to jail. A couple of other minor, but they were Ray Williams, the finance director, and me. But see, I was a non-executive director. I mean, it was very unusual for a non-executive director to go to jail. But my profile and the government's desire to make a statement. I mean, they spent $80 million on the HIH Royal Commission, and then they spent that money again putting me in jail.
So you're talking about your profile, and one thing we haven't mentioned that during all this time, you and your wife Lindy have been very active philanthropists.
Yes.
In fact, the Royal Children's Hospital in Sydney, they've got the annual Gold Ball, which was founded by your wife Lindy.
Yes.
So, you know, this is the type of, you know, prominence in society that you guys have achieved, and raised enormous amount of money and donated enormous amount of money to various charities. So you did have a very high profile in addition to your corporate role. I guess that's kind of what we're talking about. Tell us a little bit about that philanthropic activity.
Well, as I said, the Menzies government sponsored Dad into Australia. You know, not many people were accepting migrants, and Australia did. And that's on Dad's level. Mum actually had a different exposure to the war. She was actually in Jakarta because her stepfather had his own band. He was a violinist, and her real father was a pianist. So she's very musical, spoke 7 languages, very cultured. Mum was of Russian descent. You know, very much no debt. You can only buy what you have in the mattress, and
must have been a very harmonious marriage.
Well, you know, middle to upper class Russians in those days, they didn't like marrying Hungarians because Hungarians are those business people, yucky, and you know, and Mum of course never knew what the word debt was through her childhood, but you know, she was an only child. She had a good upbringing, but it was very, you know, her parents were older and she read, you know, they were cultured, and Dad was that, you know, ugly, not in looks of course, but ugly and in temperament, and business was an ugly profession.
Entrepreneurial, aggressive.
Yeah, you know, those horrible Hungarians, and so
exactly those horrible Hungarians.
Yeah, and I mean, Mum and Dad got married, to give you an example, and during the first couple of days, there was a knock at the door around 7 or 8 in the morning, and Dad bolted out the back door. And as he bolted up, he said to Mum, this is Mum telling me the story. She said, "Say I'm interstate." So Mum didn't understand what that meant. But that's what she said. So she said it. He was a debt collector, and he came back, and she says, "Do we have debt?" And Dad looks at her and says, "First mortgage on the house, second mortgage on the house. The furniture's rented. Do we have debt? I don't think we have equity." It's an easier answer. So like this was an anathema to Mum.
Yeah.
So you know, that was her introduction to being the wife of a businessman.
So that's where the philanthropy comes from. Your father.
So Australia was very good to us, you know, and so it's always great to give back. And this is the greatest country in the world. I mean, I know when you talk about capitalism, obviously it's America, but you know, Australia is just unbelievable, and all the migrant families from those days till now, the Chinese, the Vietnamese, you know, the Indians, you know, the Hungarians, the Europeans, depending on the decade we're talking about, this place is pretty good.
I mean, I often wonder myself what would have happened if I went to the US instead of Australia. I think in Australia we still have this tall poppy syndrome, and you know, it's a very different world. And the US has that critical mass in technology, for example, where we don't really. So I think technology companies or areas that I was interested in, which is biotechnology, was a very different place. But overall, I never regret it, because I think that when you put everything on balance, the people, the environment, the safety, the culture, you can't really beat Australia.
It's also very safe. We're a long way away from the real problems. I mean, unless there's a massive problem in China, but I don't suspect there will be. You know, I'm not one of those things that believes China is going to drop a few missiles on Australia. I don't. I don't think China is economically that strong at the moment, actually. So I think, you know, I mean, they're a great nation.
They've got their own problems right now.
Yeah, but yeah. So we gave back. I was brought up to give back, And that's important. That's important. I look at some people that I see. I'm not a big giver of the standard charities, even though I do. There are some staples that you always give to, but I like to give to individuals, or I like to give for a reason, whatever that reason is. And I'm very keen on education. Like I like to give scholarships out. I like to help people grow intellectually, because that's the way you make a living. That's the way you become an entrepreneur. That's the way you employ people, you pay taxes, and you grow the economy.
Exactly. At an individual level, I think that's one of the only one or two options out of poverty, really, education, or the other is perhaps sport. And at a societal level, of course, educated people tended, and certainly in society, contribute beyond what normally you would say. So let's get back to the story around. So you had this high profile. You've been really visible in society. You've been, or your wife was chairman of charities. You've donated a lot, and then you're, relatively young, early 40s, heading up a major listed company, recently sold into this other big company. You go on the board. There are all sorts of troubles. It all comes to bed end, and there you are, and you're being pursued, and you're there. You get a conviction, and you end up in jail. So tell me about that.
Horrible.
I didn't expect much else.
Yeah, it's hard to go from being a superstar, if I could be immodest, to being a leper, a financial leper. It's hard to go, as when I was contemplating writing a book, friends of mine will joke like, "What's going to be the heading of the book, from penthouse to shithouse?" It's a very big change to go from a nice house in Vaucluse to a cell in jail. So, yeah.
And I read that you were actually put into high security at some point, or higher security, because you were trying to restart your business, or
yeah,
that true?
There were those articles. It's not true.
It's not true.
It's not true. There were articles. First, you were allowed to carry on business in jail. You are actually allowed. But I wasn't trying to run businesses from jail. I mean, like, it's hard to run a business from jail. I mean, the difference when you're a white collar criminal, and once you're convicted, you're a criminal, and it's not like you've got a job, you get fired from the job, you go to jail. With me, when I went to jail, well, I have responsibilities. I have a wife, I have 4 kids, I have a mortgage, I have businesses that have debt. So you can take me out of that and put me in a different physical location, but mentally, I still have responsibilities. I still have to provide. If I'm not working, even advising, then these businesses could collapse. So it's really unfair to think that a commercial person can just go from a physical location to another physical location and stop. It doesn't work in my real world. And so it didn't. I didn't stop. I had my finance director come in once a week to meet me, and we discussed decisions that had to be made. Sure, I couldn't be a director of any company, but decisions had to be made, and these were my companies, or I had major stakes in these companies. But I wasn't trying to run the businesses. I was trying to survive. The articles you're referring to was, my son came in, and I actually had in Kirkconnell, that particular jail, I actually had permission from the governor to help Jason, my son, with some work, some school work. And then we did have a notebook, and we were taking notes and all that. And I had that permission, and then it was exaggerated. Right. Like I was doing things without permission. And I was taken out of low security and then thrown into the main jail of other jails. And that is a big demotion, because low security is obviously much easier than the main of not maximum, but real jails. It's much easier in low security than it is in where I was put. I think they used that as a reason. I think that they wanted me to go into the main. I think it was continued punishment. When I say I think, I'm being nice. It was absolutely done on purpose.
I mean, you're talking about family, not having your family around. I mean, that is devastating alone enough when you're in jail. You've got four kids. But besides that, what was the hardest thing in being in jail?
Look, being a zombie and not being required to think. In fact, to think in jail is actually depressing. They want you to be a zombie. They want you to be institutionalized. They want you to wake up at a certain time, put on the same colored clothes, go walk to your same, dumb job. And, they want to control you. You're a number, you're not a name. And they want that because that's the way they can control, small number of corrective service officers controlling a large number of criminals, a lot of them violent. So, so it's hard when you're an entrepreneur. It's hard to sit in that environment. That was the hardest thing.
And in terms of rehabilitation, there's lots of talk about jails having, facilities to rehabilitate criminals. Did you experience any of that, or there was none of that?
Because I'm privately educated and very polite, I don't want to say rehabilitation is bullshit in jail. I don't want to say that word, of course. But there is no such thing as rehabilitation in jail. All right? Yeah. There could be, and I know a lot of people try. And my generalization doesn't mean there weren't the occasional success story. Yeah. But those people that go into jail are invariably reoffenders. You get to meet more criminals, and you get to hone your skills, whatever they are. I knew nothing about drugs when I went into jail, absolutely nothing. And when I came out of jail, my knowledge was pretty good.
You were an expert.
I wouldn't say expert, but pretty good. You can buy any drug in jail.
Amazing.
And it's just more expensive because it's just a different...
Do you get paid?
It's a different ecosystem. Yes, you do. When you do a job in jail, you do get maybe $60 a week. And the $60 is valuable because you have to pay for your own telephone calls, and you have to pay for, if you want, you get basic food, but if you want anything else, there is a buy-up every week, and family or friends can put in $100 a week. But, if you want to make some telephone calls and buy some warm clothes and buy a TV, like everyone had to buy their own TV, these things weren't provided. That $60 was necessary.
So obviously there's a lot of shame, negativity, and pain associated with that experience. But are there any lessons you've learned? Anything positive that you took away from that?
Yeah. Believe it or not, there are some positive things that I've learned from jail. And, I think it's made me a different person today because I went to jail. I wish I hadn't gone to jail, and I wish I hadn't learned those things, but I hope an intelligent person, whatever their environment, comes out of that environment a little bit smarter. The first thing, the most important thing I learned, I think, is that I was brought up on the basis that you can be whoever you want to be. You can be as successful as you want to be. You work hard, you will succeed. Don't worry about your socio-economic background. You can do whatever you want to do. Look at Abraham Lincoln, one of 11 kids. He became the president of the United States of America. There, look at Kamala Harris now. She's on the verge of becoming the president. Look at her upbringing. Look at Albanese, Housing Commission to that. So you can be whatever you want. And I was brought up that way. And then I went to jail. And then I met an echelon of people that I had never met before. From my spoiled little, Vaucluse, Cranbrook, eastern suburbs, upbringing, I met a different echelon of people. I've always had a diverse range of people that I met because of my business, but I didn't live with all these different echelons. And invariably, if you're in jail, you're not the most productive member of society. So you're meeting the worst of the worst. And I met a lot of people who were very bright and with different parents and a different upbringing would have been very successful. And I realized that they'll never make it. They're sexually abused, taken advantage of, abandoned, didn't know the concept of love. And so it came, my whole philosophy, like, there are some people that just won't make it. Government does have a role in looking after people that, that just will never make it. And they're career criminals. Like, there's many smart people that whenever they needed money, they would go out, steal a car, strip the car, and make their $6,000 and live that life for a week and then do it again, or drugs or whatever they were doing. They never had 9-to-5 jobs. They could not cope with a 9-to-5 job. It's too boring. I counselled many people in jail, like, who don't want to come back to jail, but I said, but you've got to get a job. Well, hey bro, what do I earn if I work 9-to-5, 5 days a week? Go, 500 at the time, $800 or something. I can't live on that.
Wow.
So like that changed me. That did change me. And the other thing is that I never really believed in the philosophy of luck.
So let me go back. It changed you. So you became more empathetic and insightful about society, and empathetic to a group of people who will just, because of their circumstances, how their life evolved, they're just never going to have the opportunity to change and contribute.
But also, as a venture capitalist, whose I think main job is to assess character, I just think surviving in jail, meeting all these different people, is also part of the development of understanding character, and I think that gives me a different foundation, and I think it helped, and luck. I mean, I am a believer in luck now, whereas I wouldn't have believed it before. But I believe there's good luck and bad luck. I also believe the harder you work, the more lucky you become. But the concept of luck is different for me today than it was pre-jail.
In what way?
Well, I just believe there is such a thing as luck, and whereas before it was just a question of hard work and education.
So I want to thank you so much for sharing that. I want to go now to when you were released from jail and that transition. So what did you do? How did you manage that whole process of transitioning back into normal life, into your family, into your profession?
It's harder to come out of jail than to go into jail. It's amazing, but it's harder. And the reason is, I think, is because you're thrown into jail and then everything's done for you, meaning that your hours, your clothes, and there's nothing to do, and you just sit there on my first night and you sit there and go, oh my God, how did this happen? Whereas when you come out of jail, firstly, I was in jail for 2.5 years. So then you sort of like, you've got to relearn to make decisions. Like, although 2.5 years is not a long period of time, but it's not a short period of time.
It's long enough, I think.
It's long enough
to
like, you may be institutionalized after 5 or 6 or 7 years, but 2.5 years is a long enough time. And for instance, it may sound trite, but the first day of when you're out of jail, you got to pick what you're going to wear. You can do your hair if you want to, or you don't do your hair if you want to. In jail, no one cares, right? You can do your shower, not shower. You wear the same color clothes, etc. Well, in the real world, you have to make decisions. A lot of little decisions, a lot of major decisions. So that was hard. I kept my office. When I was in jail, I kept my office, and I just said to myself, I visualized coming back and working in my office. That's one of the things I did. Some of the old timers in jail, they always say, if you want to get through jail properly, right, forget the outside world, just live in jail. It's easier for you. And I accept that. I didn't forget the outside world. My wife and my family visited me every week. I had friends visit me, and those visits were very important to me for a mental survival. I got all the papers in jail, whatever I could buy. I got them regularly when the officers gave them to me. No one got the financial review in jail but me. It was all the Telegraph for the sports section. That's what we're dealing with. So I visualized being back in my office, and so I got back on whatever Thursday or Friday, and I was in my office on Monday. and I didn't have much to do, admittedly, but I was happy to be there. That was my goal: get back into my office, start again. It was very difficult. It was very difficult because my profile was still very high, and let me give you an example of how hard it was and how unfair it is. It's very hard to get back after you've been in jail. It doesn't matter who you are, from the average guy to me, and I'm not saying I'm not average. I'm just saying from education and all sorts of bases. So I come back. I've been away 2.5 years. Don't forget, I was not accused of fraud, and I was not accused of embezzlement. It was dishonesty and lying to a journalist, and that's what I admitted to, and that was the plea I did. And obviously, I accept that plea. I'm not traversing my court orders, but
we don't want to get you into trouble.
No, again, and so I had no bank accounts; they were all cancelled.
Could you open one when you came back?
Well, I'm about to say I had no stockbroker accounts, no nothing. So I had a lot of friends in the industry. Now, I'd never missed an interest payment in my life. I never let anyone down in the financial sense, to the best of my ability. So I went to open a broker's account, and they said yes, and then went to the credit committee, and they said no. Went to another broker, yes, no, and then I did the rounds of all the brokers I knew. Brokers I had a great relationship with.
Of course.
I mean, in 1986 and 1987, I was trading, $1 billion a year with several brokers. And so, I owned a stockbroker. I owned financial advisors. So I knew these people, and they all said yes, sure, we'll open an account for you. But I went to the credit committee. It was no, and I was sort of like even contemplating leaving Australia because I didn't think I'll be allowed to recover in this country. This is a tough country. In that regard, you're solvent or insolvent. There's no Chapter 11 in this country, not in those days anyway. There's something slightly like it now, but not those days. So it's black or white, and you're in or you're out. And I couldn't even open a stockbroker's account. Eventually, I went to a great friend of mine, Martin Lakos at Macquarie Equities, who's still there to this very day and very senior, and he was senior then. He tried to open an account for me, and he couldn't. And I said, I don't know what to do, Marty. Everyone's saying no to me. It's not like I'm asking for a gift. When you open the stockbroker's account,
you put
money in, or you pay. When you buy something, I'm not asking for credit. I'm just asking for the opportunity to trade. Anyway, he said no, nothing can be done, Rod. The only thing can be done. The only person who can make that decision for us at Macquarie Bank is Alan Moss, the current managing director. So, fortunately, I knew Alan Moss, and I rang Alan, took my call very kindly, and I said hi, and he said, welcome back, I'm sorry what happened to you. He's a very polite man. I said, look, Alan, here's my problem. I'm a financial leper. No one will open an account for me. Every credit committee says no because I went to jail. I've done my time. Doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong. I've done wrong. Doesn't matter what people think. I did my time. I now need a chance to recover. And he said, so why are you ringing me? I said, your credit committee said no. And I'm asking you to overrule that credit committee and give me an account at Macquarie Equities. Because if you give me an account, everyone else will follow like sheep.
Of course.
Because I will market it that I'm going to be trading again. And
they will all want your money.
Well, that's right, because that's all they want. So he said, let me think about it. Give me 24 hours. And, and he probably doesn't realize how significant it was for me, even though I thanked him profusely. He came back within 24 hours and he said, your account will be opened.
That's fantastic.
It is fantastic. And I used that to open another 6 accounts within a month. And so I could start that part of my recovery.
Right.
And, and you got to use whatever you have. And by saying that, like, for instance, it took me, being a criminal, for instance, it's virtually...
Having a criminal record, rather.
Okay. Having a criminal record, obviously going to America is impossible because they don't it's very difficult once you've gone to jail to get a visa to go to America. It took me 2.5 years, but I did, and I do. Once again, it's like you've just got to pick your goals and work towards them, and there are a lot of defeats along the way. The first 2 or 3 years, going back to your question, the first 2 or 3 years, it was really hard because no one wanted to do anything for me. I built my businesses always on joint ventures and, syndicating loans and, using other people's money and my own.
Yeah.
But I had very little of my own, and no one wanted to help me. And but there have been there have been some great people. And the other embarrassing thing is that when people, you remember, prior to all the problems, people would ring me and say, please be on my share register, because if you go on, others will follow.
Of course.
So I'm the same guy, and 2 or 3 years later, now people say, no, we don't want your name on the register because you're on the register, it's going to cause us trouble. Can you imagine the complete
Absolutely.
change?
Yeah.
It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
So I used to have to operate in nominee companies to hide my name because that was just the way to do it.
That was the reality.
It's different now today.
Of course.
I'm not saying it's perfect. I don't think a person with my profile that went through what I went through and Google and the internet, it will never be perfect. But it's very good now, and I think it will continue to get better.
So what year did you get out of jail?
I went to jail in 2005, and I came out in 2007.
So that was, 17 years ago.
Yeah.
17 years ago, a long time.
The first 10 years were very hard.
But now you're investing.
Yes.
You've always been investing.
Yeah.
But, you've worked through it. It was really difficult. But, in the past few years, in particular, you've been investing in venture capital as well as other things. You've got a lending business. So tell me your view of where the venture industry is currently, from your perspective, from an investor's perspective.
Market's changed a lot in the last 20 years. Back in the old days, people like me would invest, and then 1 or 2 years later, with success, you'd do the second round. You'd get most of your money out. You do it and you still have left, and then you do a third round. You have all your money out, and you still have equity, and then you'd either float or do a trade sale. These days, if you do something, you really got to take it all the way through. But there are a lot of funds now, much more funds today than there were in the past. Look, venture capital it's still one of the best businesses to be in the world, because you get to meet so many interesting people, and I like to say that when people say, what is a venture capitalist? I like to say it's my job to help make sure your dream becomes a reality. That is my job. I mean, my job is to make money. That I'm unashamedly a capitalist in that regard. I don't do it. It's not philanthropy. It's making money. But an entrepreneur, right? Don't forget, my court orders didn't allow me to manage businesses for 20 years. So I am a manager of businesses. That was my training. So I had to change my emphasis and go from being a manager of businesses to an investor in businesses. And even though I've always been an investor in businesses, I am very much a manager. I like managing people. I like managing problems. But for 20 years, I was limited to only investing. And under the rules and regulations, I couldn't even have what they term significant influence. Because the rules of not being a director is not just not being a director. It means not having significant influence over a public company. So I had to structure my investments where I didn't have significant influence. And significance is a grey word. It can mean anything. So you can have 5% of a company and have significant influence, or you can have 35% of a company and not have significant influence. So that was a little bit of an issue for me as well, because I was very nervous about ASIC and breaching my court orders. So I took it very seriously. I got a QC's opinion on most of my investments to make sure it didn't breach anything. But to be an entrepreneur means you have to be a little bit arrogant. You have to have a belief in yourself, because what you're saying is, I can do something better than the market. I'm incrementally better or I'm disruptively better. But that's an arrogant statement to make. So the people I meet, people you meet, we're arrogant. But I like that. I mean, I like that.
You expect that from a founder or an entrepreneur to have.
Funnily enough, if you look at the definition of entrepreneur and you look at the definition of narcissist and you put the attributes down, there's a big overlap.
Exactly.
There really is a big overlap.
I think it's well known. Well recognized.
So I like those sort of people, male or female. It doesn't matter where they come from. They've got a good idea. They're hardworking and they're honest. It's a joy to be involved.
So, what advice would you give founders who are coming to you? You see all these people, and a lot of them you already see that for one reason or the other, this is not the right opportunity. What impresses you when a founder comes to you with a great idea or a great business? Like, what are you looking for, and what advice would you give these guys to how to present themselves to impress you and get an investment?
I turned 65 the other day. I know that amazes you because I look so young, but so I've been around now for over 40 years of assessing people. And I'm not saying everyone has their own formula, but when someone comes into my world looking for my money, I like them to be dressed properly. I like a certain amount of respect. If someone comes in board shorts and thongs, it's not going to be impressive to me. I actually have thrown someone out who came to see me once many years ago like that. I just said, look, if that's what you think, you wouldn't go to a bank that way, so why would you come to see me? Now, I know some people think that's a bit arrogant, but you've got to have some standards. Obviously the quality of the submission is important. I'm not a 3-year or a 5-year budget person, because investing in an entrepreneurial company, like that, 3 years is like a lifetime. It's a lifetime, maybe 18 months. I'm very cash flow orientated. I think that's the key to success. I'm a very accounting orientated because I'm a chartered accountant. If you can't price your service or you can't price your product, you don't know your profit. So I look at a person, what is their integrity level? I mean, you've got to make a judgment call. Are they going to be a hard worker? And under pressure, will they break or will they make it? I mean, I've learned from bitter experience, you can invest in the right person in the wrong industry and you will do okay. And you can invest in the wrong person in an industry that's booming and you will lose your money. To me, it's the person that you're investing in. It's not the industry and it's not the company. It's the person. So, I try to make a character judgment, and it's like you've got to like them. I can't do business with someone I don't like, because then I'm what you would call an active passive investor. I like to have weekly reports, and I like to pick the phone up and talk. And if I don't like the person, I won't do it. Yeah. So I do have to like the person, and I suppose they have to like me. I mean, obviously they come for money, and maybe advice and maybe contacts. I mean, sometimes money is the least of what they want. Sometimes it really is advice and contacts. But let's just say it's money, to be realistic. But there has to be a form of relationship. I get close. At university, they teach you, do not get emotionally involved in your investments. I only get emotionally involved in my investments. It's just the way I am. That is what I do. I take it really seriously.
So what advice would you give aspiring venture capitalists if they wanted to get started? What should be the thing that they're focused on? What should be their primary kind of focus when they want to get started in this industry?
Sales.
Always
go for sales. You can fix everything up if you've got good sales. It's lovely to have money. It's lovely to actually build the infrastructure first. If you have a good family, or you've made some money elsewhere, or you've saved some money and you can invest in your infrastructure and your technology, that's great. Truthfully, if you can get the sales right, you get the income, you can fix everything else up. Sales are, to me, the most important things, and cash flow is the most important thing. You can survive any downturn if you've got good cash flow. Obviously, I'm a believer in debt. You know, a lot of people say, you know, debt is a disaster. Of course it is if it's too large or it causes too much problems. But debt's good. I mean, you can supercharge yourself. You get leverage with debt. You get tax deductions with debt. But it really, to me, comes down to sales.
So at the end of, or towards the end of the podcast, we normally ask a few questions that are kind of random. And in your case, I don't even think if they're that random because, you know, I'm kind of wondering, who are you today? Like after all these, you know, amazing life journey so far that you've gone through, you know, what is the key message about you? Who are you? Who have you become?
God, who have I become? You know, I have had a great journey. I've had great highs and great lows, and it's really been a privileged journey. I mean, no one wants the lows, but that's life. You know, I sold the St. Moritz Hotel to Donald Trump, and I negotiated with him for 18 months. I've had dinners with him and lunches with him. I mean, and look at him today. You know, it's been a privileged run. You know, so you know, to be going from private dinners with Clinton when he was president to being in jail. I mean, it's really a journey.
Definitely.
But who have I become? Look, I'd like to think I am who I am. I'm really just a guy that wants to make my family proud, my family and friends proud. A lot of what I do now is to try to get back to where I was. You know, in the same way that migrants came here with nothing, I'd like to get back to where I was. And it's slowly happening. I have no intentions of retiring. I don't want to retire. And the way that medical science is working these days, and you know, maybe I will have an extra 20 or 30 years. I mean, Murdoch's alive and Triggerboff's alive, and
they're still working.
Yeah, they're still working, and I'm not saying I'm anything as great as they are, but you know, they're still working, and that's what I'm talking about, the work ethic. And look, the world's a pretty miserable place at the moment now. There's a lot of issues, a lot of global problems in the world. And, you know, I've got 4 kids and, you know, one is married and, you know, I'm going to be a grandfather, I think, coming up.
Exciting.
And so, you know.
Life is good.
Well, it's, you know, you got responsibilities. I mean, so, you know, I just want to be the best I can be.
But has there been, we're talking about life, the big picture, has there been anything in life, not just business, but generally in your life, that you wanted to do but you didn't because you were too afraid to try or too afraid to I mean, it could be skydiving, but let's just take away from the trivial things.
Sure. I did do skydiving, actually, and I have done parachuting, and I have done, you know, things like that, and they don't do that much for me. I'm not a sportsman. I have no desire to do anything like that. We're a skiing family. We ski a lot. Look, I said to my kids when they were growing up, I'm not the father that's going to go out kicking balls with you, and you know, that's not who I am. I'm a corporate dad. Like, I'll come into my own when you're 16. I love you dearly, but I'll come into my own later. And so, you look, I think, I don't want to suggest that I'm boring, but I think I'm really happy in my world. I don't have a holiday home. I've never had boats and these toys. I really enjoy work. I really enjoy what I do. I'm lucky. Every day I go into work, I enjoy it. I'm not saying there aren't tough days, but as I said, being a venture capitalist and a second mortgage lender I'm meeting new people all the time. My job is evolving all the time. I am not a specialist on a production line, you know, pulling down a lever with widgets every day and living for the weekend. You know, I feel that the weekend's an interruption to the working week. I don't want to do anything else. I like what I'm doing. I'm sure I will slow down as I get older, but right now I'm pretty satisfied. And that probably is that's probably quite a limiting statement. I'm sure there are much brighter, smarter people that have a more exciting life, but I'm happy with my life.
Still staying at life, and we talked about the sliding door kind of moment. Regrets? Anything you would do differently?
Oh, look, I wish I could invent that time machine and go back. And you know, there's some notable times in my life that there were some major mistakes made. You know, obviously that big one I mentioned earlier. You know, selling to HIH made a huge difference to my life. Borrowing that $10 million from HIH to put into a company that bought HIH shares, even though it was legally approved by Minter Ellison, that was the beginning of the legal end of that one thing. I wouldn't have done that today with my knowledge, but it was legal, but it was found to be illegal. But I had legal advice. You know, there are some relationships that I've lost because of what's happened. You know, there are regrets in life.
There always are. So couple of other things that left. I want to leave this on a positive note because I think, you know, in terms of the contribution, overall contribution, and I'm sure this is something that you already know, that you've contributed so much to so many lives. So many business people are around because you've invested in their business, you've given them money. There's so many charities have benefited from what you've done. You know, the share market, lots of people made money on your companies as well. You built companies, you're a builder. But what was your best investment ever?
I've been really lucky. I've made some great investments. You know, I suppose the most outstanding investment was OneTel. You know, Jody Rich came up with an idea that Optus and FAI backed, and you know, 7-8 years later, I turned that $1.5 million into $120 million. Unbelievable, and it was a great ride, and Jody, and it was exceptional. And the collapse of OneTel was not his fault. I mean, there were issues, but he had support from two very large shareholders, and they let him down. But I had sold, so because I did very well. Not many people did well in OneTel. I created within FAI. I created a life company from zero, and I sold it for $200 million in about 10 years. FAI Home Security became the largest home security seller of home security equipment, and that went from 600,000 to 80 million sold. And of course, you know, before Andrew Forrest became the second richest man in Australia and one of the greatest entrepreneurs in Australia, you know, I backed him in a company called Anaconda. And that 4 million became 65 million. And I backed Andrew in other enterprises, and we always did well together.
Do you still keep in touch?
Yeah, very much so. And he's a good man. And you know, God is a sadistic comedian. And you know, I had 10 or 20% of everything that Andrew ever did. I backed Andrew when I first met him, when he was a broker at Jackson's. We go back that far. I would have had 10% or 20% of Fortescue if I hadn't gone to jail. Can you imagine?
I know.
Can you imagine? By the way, Andrew visited me 3 times in jail. He flew from Perth to visit me, and once with Nicola. Andrew's not a person that walks away from friendship. He's really a great Australian, not just because of his success, but I met him when he was just a bloke off the farm. So yeah, so you know, I've made some good money. I really have. And my best investment today is I have a great financial services business with some great friends of mine in America, and it's going very, very well. And it gives me US income, which is great these days.
Great these days with the exchange rate,
Yeah.
as it goes. Talking about the U.S., who's going to win the election?
Harris.
Harris.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think she's going to win by a bigger margin than most people think.
Mm.
Even though some of Trump's policies are absolutely fantastic.
Mm.
But I think it's her.
Yeah.
I think the statistics say it's her, and she's. I know people think she's vacuous. I don't think she is.
No, I don't think she is.
She's a prosecutor. She's been around a while. She's had very humble, beginnings. And look, even though I am absolutely a pure capitalist, that does not mean that you don't believe in looking after people and in welfare. And she errs on the side of being a socialist, that woman, but some of her policies are going to be very good for the masses.
Yeah,
and that's a good
I think
thing.
America needs that, because America is so divided right now. I think they're going to really need to elevate their poorest, because that's where the discontent is coming from.
I dealt with Trump. I know him very, very well. And look, I don't care about the girl activity. I really don't. I don't think it made a difference to Clinton, and I don't think it makes a difference to Trump. The thing about Trump is he's not a free trade person. He's an isolationist, and he believes in tariffs. And I don't believe in those things. But the tax rates and a number of his other initiatives are absolutely fantastic. But I don't think it's good for the world if America becomes an isolationist.
Of course.
And that worries me.
Yeah. So is there anything that we haven't covered today? And obviously it's a short interview, so we haven't covered many things, but something that is important.
In 1 hour, my 65 years, we covered everything.
Something that is important that you wanted out there, and part of this whole, because we're talking about a lot of the audience will be very young founders who will be listening to this and learning. There's so many lessons that you can draw from your experiences, even from your father's background and what he's done, how he's brought you up, then your own experiences. There's so many lessons from your story. But is there anything else that you want to share?
Yeah, I'd like to end on maybe this note then. In every generation, there are great opportunities. You look at the cost of property now, and people say, oh, it's so much more difficult to buy property today than it was, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And maybe that is statistically correct. But there are so many opportunities in Australia today. I mean, look at just AI, which I don't fully understand. But there's a whole generation of new ideas. There's a whole generation of entrepreneurs that are going to make so much money. So just because it's, 2024 and times are a little bit tough and there's a little bit of a credit squeeze, does not mean that you will not do well if you put your mind to it. And really, what is the key? Hard work. You don't give up. These are universal truths that don't change just because technology changes. So if you have a good idea and you believe it's incremental or disruptive, you just follow your dream. And I found that a good idea will always find the money.
Great advice. Well, Rodney, thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure to walk you through very briefly on your experiences in life. I particularly enjoyed this, and I was really looking forward to it, because I didn't know, even though we do research, but there's so many nuances in people's experiences, and what you've shared is amazing. So I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was Random VC. If you like what you're listening to, please follow us on your favorite podcast channel or on YouTube.